The segment was billed as a discussion, but everyone on the production floor knew exactly what it was meant to be. Tense. Controlled. Just sharp enough to trend, but not sharp enough to bleed. Candace Owens took her seat without a smile. She didn't need one. Her confidence came from stillness, not charm. George Stephanopoulos opened the show with calm polish. This morning we're joined by political commentator and author Candace Owens, here to talk about culture, controversy, and the state of conversation in America. Candace nodded. Conversation only works when both sides are allowed to speak. George smiled slightly. Then let's see if we can agree on that much. But no one in the room thought this would be a polite exchange. And the moment George picked up his first card, the energy shifted. Because whatever came next, neither of them had shown up to back down. George Stephanopoulos began carefully, but the sharpness was underneath. Candace, you've built your platform on being provocative. But many say your message does more to divide than inform. Candace Owens didn't flinch. People say that when they're not used to hearing the other side without an apology attached. George kept his smile, but his tone tightened. So you don't think your rhetoric fuels outrage? Candace leaned in. I think truth sounds like outrage when you've spent too long being lied to. That line didn't land with applause. It landed with silence. George tapped the corner of his card. Let's take one example. You've repeatedly dismissed movements that many say speak for the unheard. How do you justify that? Candace answered without hesitation. By asking who's doing the hearing. And who benefits from the noise. The air in the room felt charged now. Because this wasn't just a debate. It was a challenge. And neither of them was planning to blink first. George Stephanopoulos adjusted slightly in his chair. So you're saying the movements themselves aren't real? That the outrage isn't based in anything? Candace Owens kept her voice even. I'm saying outrage is profitable. And when you follow the money, you stop mistaking emotion for evidence. George leaned forward. That's a strong claim. You're accusing people of exploiting pain. Candace met his eyes. I'm accusing institutions of branding it. The audience didn't stir. Even the crew behind the cameras had gone still. George pressed on. But you've built your brand, too, on being the unfiltered voice. How is that different? Candace replied calmly. Because I don't ask people to follow me. I ask them to think for themselves. That answer didn't settle anything. It split the room in half. Because whatever you thought of her, Candace Owens had just taken control of the conversation. And George Stephanopoulos wasn't about to let that stand. George Stephanopoulos' tone shifted now. Less polished. More pointed. You say you're for independent thinking. But much of what you promote comes directly from partisan platforms. That's not independence. That's strategy. Candace Owens didn't blink. And yet here you are, quoting corporate media scripts and calling it journalism. The line didn't raise her voice. But it raised the stakes. George sat back, momentarily silent. The audience didn't move. Because everyone knew what that moment was. Candace continued. You're not upset because I'm wrong. You're upset because I'm not afraid of being right in the wrong room. George leaned forward. No. I'm pushing back because facts still matter. And your facts, Candace, don't always match reality. Candace didn't flinch. Reality is bigger than your version of it. And for the first time in the interview, the room felt like it might break. Because this wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about who got to define the center. George Stephanopoulos narrowed his eyes, his voice now tight with control. So if everyone's wrong but you, how do we move forward? Or is confrontation the whole point of your presence? Candace Owens shook her head. I'm not here to be right for you. I'm here so the people who never get a seat at this table know they're not crazy. George didn't look away. You keep saying that you're speaking for people. But who gave you that mandate? Candace didn't hesitate. The silence did. That line hit the floor like stone. George paused, measuring his next move. So you see yourself as a voice for the unheard. Fine. But what happens when that voice misleads them? Candace leaned in just slightly. Then they should question me. The same way I'm questioning you. Now the silence wasn't tension. It was attention. Because for the first time, both of them were off script. And only one of them looked comfortable being there. George Stephanopoulos glanced toward the crew, but no one gave him an out. The show was still live. And now, it belonged to the moment. He turned back. Let's talk responsibility, then. You say things that light fires and then act surprised when they burn. Candace Owens nodded slowly. Sometimes fire is the only thing that clears the rot. George pressed. So burning things down is the goal? No, Candace said. But pretending the house isn't already on fire is worse. The audience was silent, not because they agreed, but because no one could look away. George spoke again, carefully. Do you understand the damage your words cause to people who are trying to hold things together? Candace didn't blink. Sometimes holding things together is the problem. Some things need to fall apart so something honest can begin. It wasn't the answer George wanted, but it was the answer no one could ignore. George Stephanopoulos' voice dropped, more quiet than confrontational now. Candace, you speak like you're offering truth, but you're surrounded by controversy. You've lost platforms. You've drawn fire. Doesn't that say something? Candace Owens nodded. It says I stopped asking for permission. George leaned in. Or maybe it says the world's trying to tell you something. Candace's eyes didn't shift. Maybe. Or maybe the world's just not ready to hear what it already knows. The crowd didn't clap. They weren't sure if they were supposed to. Because this wasn't just a political exchange anymore. It was personal, uncomfortable, unscripted. George glanced down at his cards, then pushed them aside. So where does this go, Candace? Do we just scream until no one listens? Candace sat back. No. We speak until people remember how. And for a few seconds, neither of them said another word. Because they both knew. Whatever happened next would decide who walked out owning the moment. George Stephanopoulos folded his hands, choosing his final question carefully. Then let me ask you plainly, Candace. If your words divide people, even unintentionally, is that still worth it to you? Candace Owens looked out toward the silent audience. Her voice didn't rise. It settled. If unity means silence, then yes. It's worth it. George didn't respond right away. There was nothing left in the cards. No segment to soften the edge. Candace continued. We talk about unity like it's peace. But sometimes it's just quiet obedience. And I didn't come here to obey. The room held still. George spoke finally. Then I guess we're done. Candace nodded once. I was done before we started. She stood. Calm. Not triumphant. Just finished. And without waiting for an outro, she walked off set. George sat in the silence that followed, hands still folded, looking into a camera that wasn't sure what to do next. Across the country, the clip spread within minutes. Not because someone won, but because, for once, someone didn't flinch. The camera stayed on George Stephanopoulos for a second longer than it should have. His expression wasn't angry. It was something quieter, something closer to reflection. The producers cut to commercial late. Too late. Because the pause after Candace Owens walked out said more than any ad could. By mid-afternoon, the video had already been clipped, captioned, and debated. Headlines didn't agree on what had happened. Candace Owens melts down on GMA. George shuts her down with facts. Live Waco.